All right, let's do it. So, hey everybody, I'm James, co-founder of AccountAim. AccountAim, for those unaware, is a go-to-market data analytics platform. We offer the RevOps warehouse, which is centralizing disparate data sources across the go-to-market stack, so ops folks, marketers can run more efficient go-to-market and marketing programs through better segmentation, targeting, attribution, sales alignment, and a lot more. All that good stuff. Joined by Andrew Nadeau of Alignly today for a fun topic. The more I talk to go-to-market leadership, the more I hear that the traditional MQL is not working for teams. Some marketers complain that it's not a good indicator for sales. Non-marketers sometimes complain that marketers are juicing the metric with no real benefit to the business. These are things I hear often. But the question kind of becomes like, if not the MQL, then what? So that's what Andrew's going to kindly walk us through today. So I'll hand it over here very shortly, but also wanted just to add that let's make this interactive. Add questions to the Q&A box at any time. I'll kind of monitor it as Andrew walks through and field those questions on your behalf. And let's make it a fun one. So let's kick off here. Andrew, do you want to kind of introduce yourself and just dive right in?
Absolutely. Yeah, so this topic, it's funny, you always hear people talk about the MQL is dead or MQL doesn't work for us. Um, but there's very few people that actually talk about, well, what do you do instead of an MQL? So that's what I'm hoping to shine some light on what I've seen kind of work in the past. So just about me. So I've been in go-to-market for about 15 years. Held positions in on the marketing side, the sales development side, as well as in operations. So I've kind of got to see all aspects of businesses and kind of what works in terms of aligning sales and marketing. I started Alignly back in 2017, and we released our first Salesforce app in 2020. So we've got currently four apps on the Salesforce App Exchange, and all of our apps are kind of focused on this area of go-to-market operations. So we have a tool called Alignly Attribution, which does marketing attribution inside of Salesforce. Alignly Beacon, which you'll see some screenshots are actually from the Beacon product. This is tracking sales follow-up on Salesforce campaigns. Alignly Contact Role, which is actually a free product from us. It does association of contact roles onto opportunities and it allows you to automate that. And then finally, Alignly Lead to Account does lead to account matching and routing and auto conversion. So just a quick kind of agenda of what I'd like to talk about. Um, so first, we'll just define the traditional MQL, just so we're all aligned on what that definition looks like. Then we'll kind of talk through how the traditional MQL is typically implemented in practice, the flaws of the traditional MQL from my perspective, and then what's changing in go-to-market, and then finally, what's kind of a modern alternative to the MQL. So let's first talk about the definition of MQL. So MQL tends to be a prospect who has shown interest in your product or service. And it's typically based off of the marketing efforts, and it's what is generally most likely to become a customer versus other prospects. So really, you're trying to rank your best prospects and who sales should focus on. So key characteristics of MQL, they've engaged with your marketing. So they download a white paper, they attended a webinar, they fill out a contact form, that type of stuff. There are a match against your target customer profile, and this could be based off of firmographics and/or demographics. And then the final piece is they've met some sort of predefined criteria set by sales and marketing. So that's typically like a lead score or lead score threshold, or could be a specific action. So like, for example, somebody requests a demo, it might go straight to an MQL and straight to sales. So what is the purpose of an MQL? And in researching this, it's kind of interesting. I looked back, I was like, so ever since I've been in go-to-market, this has been a thing, right? So it's kind of like, when did this actually come out? So 2006-ish is kind of what I found, was when the MQL SQL framework was kind of brought to market. So we've been doing the same kind of playbook for the last 20 years. So keep that in mind as I'm kind of talking through what's the purpose of the MQL. So it was originally designed to help align sales and marketing by signaling that a lead is warm and therefore sales ready and ready for further qualification by sales. It was designed to kind of help a capacity constrained sales team focus on the highest quality leads first. and then also to optimize the time spent for your expensive sales resources. So going back 20 years when this is kind of brought out, you had the world is very different, right? You didn't have AI, you didn't have sales engagement tools. You typically didn't have like even like SDRs or BDRs. And a lot of your sales reps were like field reps, right? So you were sending leads directly to field reps to follow up. So therefore, very expensive resource. You wanted to make sure you optimized their time. So obviously, markets change, things have changed over the last 20 years, but we still kind of run the same playbook.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting, Andrew, that this came about same time as roughly HubSpot did, because I think it's very tied to like the marketing engine as well. And I know that they've,
Yeah.
in their last at their last inbound conference, have kind of changed their framing as well. So I think it's fitting that you're kind of talking about changing the framing as it relates to MQL, which I view as kind of coming up in the same era. So I think you're onto something.
Yep. Yep. It was Marketo and HubSpot were kind of the two that were pushing this idea back then. Um, cool. So what does a typical kind of MQL implementation look like? I think we all kind of know this if you're on this call, but I'll just run through it. So typically marketing gets an MQL goal. That goal is typically set from usually looking at like, hey, what type of revenue, what type of bookings do we need? Usually a quarter or 2 quarters out, depending on your sales cycle. And then you kind of back into your MQL goal. So you say, hey, what's our conversion rate on our ops? How many ops do we need? What's our MQL to op conversion rate? And then your MQL goal gets set. That's the basic form of how I've seen companies do it. Obviously, there's some flaws I'll talk about shortly around that. Um, and then once you get your MQL goal, marketing says, okay, what are all of the scoring inputs we can do to score people up? And those tend to be a combination of firmographic, demographic, and marketing engagement. And then sales ops and marketing all agree on a score threshold, let's say 50. So when something scores up to a 50, we're going to pass it over to the sales team, and it's an MQL. So it gets passed over. And then sales, in today's environment, sales will typically drop it into a several touch sequence. Sales follows up X times over X amount of days. And then hopefully you get a positive reply, you schedule a meeting, create the op, and eventually, hopefully, they return into business. So that's kind of the typical playbook that people run.
And ideally, sales actually reaches out, right? But not always the case.
True. Yep. Um, so then what does that kind of journey look like on a timeline? So I'll just kind of run through that. So your touch points, right? You're scored up somebody, eventually they hit that 50, they become an MQL, and then you've got this sequence starting. We've all been probably the recipients of a sequence where it just feels like the emails just keep coming. And eventually what'll happen is either you get frustrated and you unsubscribe, or in a positive case, you would have earlier in the sequence at some point scheduled a meeting and created an opportunity. Um, so that's kind of what tends to happen. And you tend to see that long sequence because you had like the sales lofts and the outreaches in the market saying, hey, you need 14 touches over 21 days before somebody replies, right? And then that got ingrained in people's heads of, hey, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So super common kind of process right here. So what are kind of the flaws of that traditional MQL model? And I'm going to break this down into like three categories. So incentives, execution, and then operations. So the first one is just some flaws around the incentives. So the first is as soon as you give a marketing team some sort of MQL goal, and that MQL is based off of scoring, marketers will tend to change how they think about their job, right? They'll think about, all right, I need to get people to score up to MQLs, not necessarily I need to educate prospects to help them understand how a product or service is going to help them, right? So just that small mental shift can kind of sometimes have the team kind of focus in the wrong area. The next thing is if I'm gold on just getting MQLs, I'll tend to stop marketing to someone once they become an MQL. I feel like my job's done. I've passed it to sales. Now it's sales' job, right? And that's how we end up with this friction between sales and marketing. Really, ideally, marketing continues to nurture them, and their job is to get somebody to not only be an opportunity, but continue to nurture them all the way through that opportunity cycle to a customer, and then even after their customer, right? And then the other thing you tend to see, James, you alluded to this, is that if you have a stretch MQL goal and you feel like you might not hit it, sometimes people tweak the scoring model a little bit to help things get up to where they need to be. And that's why you tend to see marketing teams always hit their MQL goal, where sales never hits their pipeline or revenue goals.
Andrew,
Uh,
I'm curious, and this is a bit of an aside, like what do you think is the right way to like tweak an MQL definition or model? Like, is there a best practice? And maybe you can just tell me that, based on the outcome of this presentation, like we shouldn't even be thinking about MQLs, but curious what you've seen as best practice there.
I'll talk about this a little bit in a second, but I think like there shouldn't be this like one scoring threshold that then there's that handoff point. So we'll talk about this in a second. There's going to be multiple points where you should be engaging. So I think like the scoring model might not be the best way. I think it can help inform the sales team. And like if there's a score there, they can know, all right, where should I actually prioritize if I do have a list of 30 people I need to follow up with?
Hmm.
But the actual like threshold of when that gets passed might not be the optimal way to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
If that makes sense. Um, So the next thing I'll talk about is just some like executional flaws with how people tend to roll out MQLs. Um, so the first one is we assume, and this is kind of similar to what you just asked. So we assume that a scoring model can like accurately predict when we should hand somebody off to sales. And the actual reality of that, and then if you think about the inputs, right? Like the inputs are completely arbitrary. So if you think about the outcome of that is you could have somebody that has a lead score of 10, but they've got budget, they've got a project, and they're actually talking to your competitors already. But because they haven't scored up to a 50 yet, you're not reaching out to them from a sales perspective, right? So there might be missed opportunity.
Hmm.
The flip side of that is you might have prospects that show no intent that you're able to get to score up because they might have been on your website, they might have clicked some emails, they might have attended like a high level thought leadership webinar. Therefore, they scored up, but they have no intent, no reason to buy your product or service, but yet you've just MQL'd them, you've passed them to sales. And that's where sales might get frustrated. So that intent piece is a big piece of the strategy around MQLs. And then we also assume, based off the scoring model, of like this kind of linear buying journey. Um, Whereas I know from my own personal buying experience and just being around a long time is that people come in and out of market all the time for different solutions, right? Like budget cycle, maybe my budget cycle doesn't line up. Maybe I just had a really bad experience with the vendor I'm already using, and now I want to go look at alternatives. Or in the case of like somebody like SalesLoft and Drift, they just had a security breach. Maybe now I'm in the market because I need to switch to a different vendor, right? There's all sorts of things that happen. It's not like this linear path of, oh, I'm going to do research for this solution and then I'm in the consideration phase and then right like that we tend to think that people go through. So people come in and out of being a potential buyer, but yet MQLs don't really account for that too well.
Yeah, this makes so much sense. And I love the second bullet point around intent. We actually had a customer who had a very good playbook around when BDRs reach out. And we were actually in AccountAim calculating like the meeting booked rate based on each signal for a certain type of content download for a certain web page visit. And you could see a vast difference in like what actually led to a meeting. And so I think if you were to obfuscate that into one score, that doesn't actually tell you like who you should reach out to. So I think that level of precision is so much more important.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Yep. And then the other piece of this is usually if you have this like kind of blended MQL number, and teams are getting better about this now, but like a lot of times sales doesn't even know why they're reaching out. They're just, hey, here's an MQL, go follow up. And if if you kind of have this blended model or blended thing of reasons why sales is following up, and they tend to not trust the data or tend not to trust the model, and they don't know why they're following up, you slowly lose trust and you erode trust with the sales team, and then they become frustrated. Um, so going back to like intent and actually knowing why you're following up is really important. And then the final piece is just like if you have this like MQL threshold, you pass over to sales. Sales is one shot at kind of getting the meeting, especially if you're passing it to like a BDR, SDR, right? They're just so laser focused on getting that meeting, so that's what they're comped on. Um, you could tend to kind of lose focus of like, well, what are you really trying to do? Very rarely is that follow-up going to be value driven, and then a lot of times you're just going to kind of piss people off because you're going to really be pushy, not value driven, and then eventually people might just unsubscribe, or you'll hurt your brand in the process. So, so that's kind of where some of the execution flaws happen. And then finally, operational flaws. So I'm going to give kind of a Salesforce centric view of this just because that's kind of the world I live in. But this can actually apply to some of the other CRMs out there. So one thing I've seen companies do, these are all kind of examples of just ways I've seen companies make mistakes or what I think are mistakes around this. But one thing is like a prospect can only ever be an MQL once. Um, Very common thing that you tend to see. And obviously, like we just talked about, people come in and out of that buying process. So if you're not re-MQLing people and you're not properly measuring that each time they re-MQL, you're gonna hold yourself back a bit. The next one is, if, again, this is very Salesforce centric, but Salesforce, you always have leads and contacts. I've seen companies where it's like an MQL can only be a lead in our system. So therefore, they completely ignore the whole contact side of their database. When the contact side of their database might have some of your best leads, right? They might have people that previously talked to sales and went close lost, but yet they went close lost just because of timing or budget, right? Doesn't mean they're completely dead. But we just completely ignore them, right? Even from a routing perspective or follow-up perspective, they just kind of get ignored. So you got to look at your entire database. Um, this is another really common one, is people report on a blended MQL conversion percentage. And that blended number will have things like people raising their hand and requesting demos or filling out a contact sales form. Those you'll see convert to an op at like 80%. So what's interesting is we've looked at companies where we said, okay, look at your MQLs that have a hand raiser. What's your conversion rate on those? And then what are your MQLs that don't have a hand raiser? And you tend to see like an 80% number if they have a hand raiser, and then like a 3% number if they have no hand raiser. But yet the blended number that they report on and build their models on is like an 8% blended number. So as you try to scale that, if you're saying our MQLs convert at 3%, but as you scale, it's not hand raisers, you're going to miss your number. And sales again is going to get frustrated because stuff's just not going to convert to pipeline and ops.
Yeah, that feels like a huge one too. Is you just think about planning and understanding the drivers of the business. Like the more segmented you can get, the better. And I think blending
Yep.
is such an issue.
Yep. Exactly. And then no feedback loop on the inputs of an MQL and the quality of that MQL. So again, we're just passing MQLs over. We're saying, hey, this one wasn't good or not good, but then we don't actually understand, well, what were the inputs? And this goes back to like the intent conversation, right? If we're passing over a bunch of stuff with no intent, but yet we're not really tracking what makes up that MQL and what's actually converting, you're going to end up in a world where you just don't know where to invest going forward. And then finally, another kind of just common one I've seen is like marketing will actually keep people in their marketing automation platform and not sync it to Salesforce till it becomes an MQL. Um, but in the day we're in right now, where you've got a lot of sales signals, outbound prospecting, if sales doesn't even know somebody is actually engaging with marketing over here and just might not have be scored up high enough, and then you've got sales team actually like prospecting people in your CRM because they imported them from Zoom Info or whatever, it just becomes a big mess. So keep your systems in sync with each other so that your sales team can see the big picture, even if somebody hasn't scored up to an MQL. So what's changing in go-to-market? Um, so as we kind of talked about, buying journeys have never been more chaotic. People are moving in and out of market. This is a big one. The cost to follow up with somebody is starting to go to zero with things like marketing automation platforms, sales engagement platforms, AI SDRs, AI doing the research for you, AI writing the emails for you, right? So the reason why we went to MQLs was to like because resources were scarce. But well, the reality is now we can actually follow up with everybody, and we can follow up and do a pretty good job with personalization and all that based off of what we have with AI. And then we've got new marketing and sales tech. So there's things like de-anonymized traffic with RB2B and Vector. We've got intent signals from vendors like Common Room, Ample Market, User Gems. We've got AI research and enrichment with tools like Clay or Unify. We've got ABM platforms with 6sense and Demandbase, right? So the market is just completely changing, and how we approach go-to-market is changing. And then finally, with just all the noise in the market, brand and being the first vendor in a deal has never been more important. So we want to make sure that every touch point we have on somebody matters, and it's quality.
Yeah, this is great. And I just keep thinking too with all of those points, and especially two and three, like if you're not doing this optimally, your competitors, which are growing every day, are going to do it, right?
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
It's paramount.
Yep. So let's get into kind of what's the modern alternative to an MQL. So as I showed before, this is kind of the traditional path with the MQL. So I want to kind of juxtapose what I think this should become. So the first one is we need to think beyond just marketing engagement. So MQL is so focused on, hey, how are people engaging? How am I scoring those marketing engagements? But I think we should really break it into four different buckets. So you should have your hand raisers. So that's going to be people that request a demo, they'll contact us, maybe people that like start a trial on your site. Um, Marketing engagement. So this is going to be the traditional MQL stuff. So webinar attendees, event attendees, white paper downloads. And again, marketing engagement here is going to be stuff that's high intent, that has some intent behind it. Then we've got actual intent signals. So those are going to be things like with somebody researching a relevant topic, not necessarily on your site, but maybe through a third party, and you're able to identify that. Visiting a competitive page on a review site like G2, visiting a high intent page on your own site, that type of stuff. And then you've got sales plays. So close loss re-engagement, fundraising announcement, job change from somebody that was formerly a customer that went to a new company, competitive displacement campaigns, all that type of stuff. So if you put kind of the lens of, okay, these four buckets, so it's not just necessarily about the MQL anymore, and I'll talk about how we can kind of operationalize this. So keep bringing up the word intent. So the next one is actually focus on intent. So historically, what we tend to do is like in a lead scoring model, we'll say, okay, every email click is worth a point. Well, instead of saying every email click is worth a point, actually look at what are they clicking on and make sure that there's intent behind that. So instead of tracking like an email click, you would track the case study download and know that, okay, if somebody's downloading that case study, yes, there's some intent to understand what we do as a company or whatever, or solving a specific problem. Um, Next one is like don't score just number of page views, but maybe you are tracking individual pages that are high intent. So maybe if somebody hits the pricing page, you know, okay, there's some intent there, or certain product pages, you know, there's intent there. Um, Rather than just having this like aggregate, hey, they viewed 30 pages, therefore we should give them 30 points. And then don't blindly track like cold outreach, but you should be tracking why, like a BDR, an SDR, an AE, why they're actually reaching out. And this goes back to, hey, there's going to be some sort of reason. And if you can start to track what that reason is, so for example, like a closed loss re-engagement campaign, you can start to build the math behind, okay, well, what is the conversion rate on that? How much pipeline do we generate from that segment? Then the question can become, well, can we scale that out?
Yeah, this is so spot on. And we actually have tracked this across a number of customers too. And closed loss actually is the highest performing play or signal that we've seen across our customer base. And it's about 10% of like BDR outreach becomes an op versus, you know, in the single digits for most other signals here. But I think this is so good too, especially if you can like nail that data aspect of this. It not only helps you with pipeline generation, but it also helps you as a business of like, where should we invest even marketing resources? Is it a certain type of case studies that are driving things, a certain type of page views? Not necessarily from hand raisers, which is what you would track historically, but from like
Right.
just showing intent and BDR outreach. So I think it's really great.
Yep. Yeah, the close loss one, I've seen companies generate as much as like 30% of their pipeline, of a new business pipeline from previously closed loss
Wow,
accounts.
that's
So
amazing.
that's definitely a huge, really, if you're not focusing there, that's definitely a huge bucket you should be focusing on. So the next piece is juxtaposing kind of the traditional model. What I think should be the model is every engagement that happens should deserve a response. So what that starts to look like is something like this, where there's some sort of engagement, then there's some sort of sales follow-up, and then, hey, did you get to an op? And this sales follow-up should be value driven and very short, 1 or 2 touch points, not a 14 touch sequence. And when this happens, their lead score, you can still do lead scoring. The lead score might be, 5 or 10, right? But we're trying to catch them early and or just continue to nurture them along with a high value, personable touch point. So what that'll look like is as people keep re-engaging, you're going to keep passing them to the sales team. And these, I keep saying sales team, but like these could be automated touches, right? They could be a marketing nurture, they could be through your sales tool, it could be an AI SDR, or it could be actually send it to a person. So you're just going to continue to do this, but each time you're going to give yourself a way to add value, have a human touch point, build your brand, and hopefully not piss people off to the point where they're unsubscribing, right? And then when the time comes, the idea here is that they're going to be coming in and out of market. So hopefully you hit them at the right point along this journey where, okay, yeah, they do want to have a conversation, and then they'll become an opportunity. The next thing is standardizing your follow-up. So you have all these touch points, right? You want to make sure you're consistently standardizing your follow-up so that you can actually have it and track it and then have it be somewhat predictable going forward. So who's responsible for following up? So is it marketing? Is it an AI SDR? Is it BDR, AE, right? Consistent messaging and content. You should be thinking about, all right, so this touch point, what do we send them? Response time SLAs. So be consistent with following up within a certain window. Don't have it be a touch point go 2 weeks and then you don't know whether or not it didn't convert because it took you 2 weeks to follow up um, or because the quality of it wasn't good. And then also standardize and have an SLA around, hey, we're going to follow up with this X amount of times over X amount of days. So that's all about creating consistency so that you can actually then have a predictable model. But here's what the kind of model should look like. And James, it sounds like you guys have built something similar out for your customers. But basically, the idea here is that you should be able to track any of this all the way through the funnel. So whether this be, hey, a closed loss re-engagement campaign, or this is a request a demo funnel, we should have this funnel so we know, A, are things getting followed up on? What's our connect rate? Connect rate is going to be an indicator of the quality of our messaging, the quality of the content we're sending out. And then in this case, successful outcomes could be a demo or discovery call, whatever makes sense for your business. And then eventually, how many ops and then close one customers did you generate? So with this, you can start to now understand, okay, requested demos are going to convert at this rate. Content syndication leads are going to convert at this rate, right? And now you can start to build out a model or a plan going forward and know what those conversion rates look like.
Yeah, this is really great. I love that data.
And then the same thing, don't just look at conversion rates, but the other thing to look at is going to be pipeline, close one business, and the dollar value of those deals because you might find fluctuations in that content syndication, the average deal size is 10K, whereas demo requests it's 50K. Obviously, the math is going to dramatically change there. And then once you've got all of that data, you can then actually set and track goals. So the things you're going to want to actually measure are unique prospects engaging over time. So this is going to be different than like MQLs because you might look at this like monthly or quarterly, but every time somebody engages with that time period, they're going to count. So you're going to count people that are re-engaging, people that you're continuing to nurture along. Um, and then you're going to look at things like connect rate, how many successful outcomes did you have, how many number of opportunities did you create, pipeline created, and then eventually close won revenue. And obviously, there's a gap in some of this, so you want those leading indicators of what's working, and then as time goes by, you'll be able to get the full picture. And then finally, once you have all that in place, you can then use this data to budget and inform your strategy going forward. So you can build a plan with all those funnel metrics, and you can build that plan based off slicing and dicing this data around like the go-to-market motion, again, being like the hand raisers, um, the marketing engagement, the intent signals, and the sales plays. You break it down by like campaign type or campaign, even individual campaigns, by channel. So, hey, how are paid ads converting, and what do we want to keep investing into that channel or whatever? And then even you might even find conversion rates and different fluctuations within like the segments of your business. If you've got a small business versus a mid-market team or mid-market versus enterprise team, they might behave differently. So you can track all this, you can measure it, and hopefully you're tracking this in real time and you're able to adapt in real time, not waiting to the end of the quarter to run all the numbers and then realizing, oh, we're going to miss our number by 30%, right? Or something like that. So hopefully it's all real-time data you're looking at and you can adjust your plan as you go. So that's all I got. Put my email and LinkedIn on there. Those are the best ways to hit me up if you got any questions.
Andrew, this is great. I think this was excellently put. I wasn't exactly sure when we talked about this webinar, like where exactly we're going to go with it beyond talking about like the MQL doesn't work, which you fully agree with. But I think separately, we've come to very similar conclusions at AccountAim too, not necessarily
Cool.
even from our product, but just from what we see like our most successful customers do. I think like what stands out to me is this is actually such a better buyer experience for buyers too. I think like I don't mind a thoughtful piece of outreach, especially when it's value driven, as you mentioned a couple times when I engage with someone's site. I think it shows a well-run company and like someone that's trying to help me. And then second, I think like I totally agree with you that the buying journey is not linear. This covers that, but I think you're probably getting net more activity in this model than before in the linear model as well. So I think it's like a win-win-win
Right.
from my view.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, I should have harped on that more about this is way more buyer centric and actually aligning to what your how your customer wants to buy to versus like the MQL model where it's again just this like drop them in this just 14 touch sequence and
Yeah,
hopefully at some point in that sequence they convert. One of the things on that is we have looked at the data and you tend to see most people actually book a meeting that do book meetings will actually book a meeting in the first few touch points. There's
yep.
very few, there's diminishing returns in that long tail. You just end up bothering people.
I totally agree. I'm surprised
Yeah.
that some people still harp on that. I think maybe the exception is the phone. I haven't seen the phone data, but from the email
Yeah.
data, yeah, I don't see much
Yep.
past step three. So I think you're spot on. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen, in the audience before we kind of break here? Happy to answer them or have Andrew, our resident expert, answer them as well. If not, we can let you back to your day on a Thursday, going once. Going twice. All right, you just knocked it out of the park, Andrew. No questions. Any final kind of
Cool.
comments here? Or I do see a
No, this
hand.
is I was trying to read the anything came in. No, this is a good conversation, so I appreciate it, James.
I actually see a hand risen here. So let's see if this works here.
Cool.
Hi.
Keel, any questions here?
Yeah. Great presentation, guys. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey,
Hey.
Kyo.
Hi, Andrew. I had a quick follow-up question around what are some of the ways that you found successful um, best flagging the reason why somebody's MQLing to a sales rep?
Yeah, I didn't talk about this too much because I was kind of trying to keep it somewhat
Simple.
agnostic
Yeah.
to tools and platforms. But in Salesforce, I like to
Mhm.
use like the Salesforce campaign as that aligning mechanism tool.
Gotcha.
Um, so every the way I like to build it out is basically every touch point or every reason why you're reaching out to somebody should go into a campaign, and then you can measure it through
Okay.
that funnel as it kind of showed. And
Got
then the sales team can go look at the campaign history
hmm
and see all of those different touch points. but you can also build out a view for them so that they can like follow up on the campaign memberships as they come in. If
Gotcha.
that makes sense. Campaigns work well in Salesforce because they span leads and contacts.
Mm-hmm.
In a HubSpot world, if you're using like HubSpot sales, they have like their lead object now, which is
Yeah.
very confusing with the Salesforce world, but their
Eh,
lead their lead object is essentially trying to do just that, where like, hey, each time somebody re-engages, you can make them a lead and then track their follow-up uh,
sure.
several times. Yep.
Yeah, I'll definitely reach out to pick your brain a little bit on that. A
Cool.
current pain point of ours is we have this field that we created in Salesforce, essentially a lead type, which indicates if we have somebody that we engaged at a trade show, for example, we'll populate the name of the trade show directly within that field. And what we find is that pain point of if you work that lead and then that person doesn't yield into a lead that's converted into an opportunity, and then that person re-engages and has another high intent type of engagement with our brand, we are essentially overwriting that reason why we want that sales rep to follow up with another engagement. They
Yep.
might engage with us at a trade show and then maybe they weren't ready to buy.
Yep.
Maybe they're not the right person to talk to. And then, maybe a quarter later they fill out a contact form and that lead type's getting overwritten.
Yep.
And so it's kind of one of a pain point that we're looking to solve. And I'm very curious to see how you can create that framework from working from a campaign.
Yep. Yeah, our Beacon product does it off of campaign member
Hmm.
records and does all the tracking
Yeah,
on the campaign member.
yeah.
I've seen other people do like custom objects too in either HubSpot or Salesforce to track these like touch points every time somebody engages.
Yeah,
James,
it's
have
kind
you?
of like a life cycle object.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
James, have you seen anything or have you guys solved
Yeah,
this for other customers?
yeah. I mean, with the accounting product, a lot of customers will actually pretty much follow the model you laid out here to a T, Andrew. So it's not exactly answering like how this would work on a traditional MQL, but we see
Yeah.
folks create the kind of like rules of engagement standard operating procedure by signal, and then accounting will track all those signals and shoot their BDRs like a digest every day of like, hey, in the past 24 hours or whatever time span you say, here are your accounts who interact with this page versus this piece of content versus this, and then those BDRs can go throw them into like the sequences already created for those.
Gotcha.
Yep. The other thing I'm a big fan of is stamping onto whatever object you're using. So in a lot of the world tends to be a campaign member record, but like stamping things like what was their score at that point in time that they engaged. If you, because just to be clear, I'm not saying don't use scoring. I'm saying like I think this could be in addition to scoring. But you can stamp the score and then you can understand, okay, people had like these tiers of scores. Do they actually convert at a higher rate? So you can actually like check yourself if your model's good. Um, and then the other thing is stamping things like what was the state of the account at that time. So like obviously you'd want to like know if they were a customer at that point in time so you can filter them out of some of your conversion tracking and stuff like that. Or if they're like a partner account, you'd want to stamp that so that way you're not trying to follow up with partners and then convert partners and you want them out of your conversion metrics. So there's a lot of benefits to doing it through some sort of custom object. Or
Andrew, there's another question that came in via the Q&A box that is asking, Christian's asking if you have a presentation of, he says the lead stage flow from unknown to sales qualified meeting. Says he's having a hard time tracking where the prospect has dropped throughout the cycle.
so this could probably be a topic for a whole nother webinar. Jason, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Um, Lead lifecycle is a tough one because, right, lead lifecycle assumes somebody has this like linear process. And as I kind of talked about, people don't go through this like linear process of like one thing that always frustrated me about the way HubSpot has like a lifecycle stage, right? And like the way they built it out originally was that people go through this lifecycle stage. It was like subscriber, lead, MQL, SQL opportunity, customer, evangelist, I think, but like no one could ever go backwards, right? So if somebody becomes an MQL 2 years ago, they're just sitting in your system as an MQL. But like that's not really the state of what they are today, right?
Mhm.
So what I was trying to propose here is that like we need to understand and actually like understand where they are in their journey, like where the account stands. But every time they're re-engaging, we're like reassessing, hey, do we need to reach out to them and try to progress them forward? So that's a long way of saying like I'm actually not a huge fan of like trying to have this like linear life cycle field. Um, but James, I'm curious if you got thoughts on that one.
Yeah, no, I generally agree. I think a more indirect answer of things that we've seen folks do, either with AccountAim or with Salesforce custom objects, is just like snapshotting all these things. So if you really do want to get an understanding of how things are changing, like that's one option. But I do totally agree with like your philosophy on that, Andrew.
Yeah, like HubSpot, I'll give you another example. In the HubSpot world, like when somebody becomes an opportunity, they're just sitting there at this life cycle stage of opportunity, right? They don't go, if they go close lost, they don't go back to being a lead or whatever, right? I know you can do that now, but that becomes very messy. And then when you try to actually look at your reporting, it becomes very messy. Um, and some of it's like account based, some of it's just on the person level. So it's hard to operationalize that well.
For sure. All right, we are basically at time.
Cool.
I see no more questions here. Andrew, thank you so much. This was really awesome. I think this was an excellent walkthrough.
Awesome. Appreciate you having me on, James.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining too. I know you're all busy, so we appreciate you hanging
Yeah,
out. And if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Andrew or myself. Take care, everybody.
excellent. Thank you. Bye.